Good evening all. On behalf of IAP Coimbatore and G. Kuppusamy Naidu Memorial Hospital Coimbatore, I welcome both the speakers and all the participants for this pediatric oncology webinar to commemorate the Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which was in September. We have actually postponed this webinar due to Scott Sir's busy schedule. So before we start the session, I request Dr. Bhuma, President IAP Coimbatore, to give the welcome address.
Good evening, one and all. It gives me immense pleasure to be in this digital platform for this webinar cancer awareness. And you all know last month was pediatric cancer month and week celebrations were there. And I think probably because Dr. Scott was held up, so it got little postponed, not very much postponed. So we can say we are a continuation of September on to October. And you all know that pediatric cancers has a special issues because they are not like adults who can come up with the signs and symptoms, and it has variegated presentations of prolonged fever, loss of weight, and sometimes when it is a central nervous tumor, they are into have some poor scholastic performance, gait problems, and they are landing and they land themselves in psychiatric department. So and sometimes they come with sudden onset fractures, so they'll be coming from orthopedic department. Sometimes they go to any other department other than pediatric department, so that sometimes the treatment is delayed. So it's very good, like now the awareness has to reach not only the public but also the doctors, so that the early diagnosis can bring out betterment in the treatment. And you all know that the commonest childhood malignancies are leukemias, and second comes the solid tumors, starting from intestinal, brain tumors. And even though and India ranks one of the highest childhood cancers, but when you compare the survival of the cancers, we have a gap of about 20%, whereas the Western world records an 80 to 85% of good survival. Here, even in the best of the centers, it is only up to 50 to 55%. So we have to build the gap and show a very good improvement in the survival. It is not only in the diagnosis, but we have to enforce the parents and make them accept the childhood malignancy, so that they stick on to the treatment. And because in our country we have all sorts of forms of treatment, from starting from naturopathy to allopathy in so many pathis, and they are the parents are more vulnerable to take up their such forms of treatment, and we have many dropouts. And it is not like any fever which goes away in one day, so the treatment plan has to be longer, and they have so many logistics issues, like the parents have to be with the child, what will happen to the father's job, and so forth. And of course they have to be followed up, and they are more prone for infections including mycoplasma and other diseases. So with this background, we have two eminent speakers, Dr. Scott and Ajita, who are budding hemato-oncologists, and we are happy to have them, and they'll show light on the pediatric cancer problem, so that we will help children suffering from cancer for early diagnosis, better treatment and management. Over to Fauzia.
Thank you, ma'am. So we will straight away go into the scientific session. The first talk is by Professor Julius Scott. The topic is, can we prevent or screen childhood cancer? A pediatrician's perspective. Now, Professor Julius Scott, sir, did his MBBS in Tirunelveli Medical College, and he did his post-graduation master's in pediatrics from CMC Vellore. Sir has a fellowship in pediatric hematology and oncology from Australia, and he heads the division of pediatric hematology and oncology and bone marrow transplant services at Sri Ramachandra Higher Education and Research Institute, Chennai. He is a visiting pediatric oncologist at Sri Kanchikodi Child Trust Hospital, Chennai, and also Shankara Nethralaya Eye Hospital, Chennai. He has over 130 national and international publications. And he's authored Scott's Pediatrics, textbook of pediatrics, one of my favorites, sir. Then over to the talk, sir. Over to you, sir.
Good evening. Can I have the slides? So I'm going to tell briefly that childhood cancer, what from a pediatrician point of view, we can do for prevention and screening. I don't think this topic is very familiar because I've been started talking on this topic only last few months. This point, which came to me only after 20 years of pediatric oncology practice. 20 years before, if somebody would have asked, in fact, 10 years before, when I was participating in the TV interviews, which I have stopped now, somebody has asked this question in Sun TV interview. A patient, can we prevent or screen childhood cancer? I actually clearly told it cannot be prevented nor screened. Okay, so the recent learning points which I thought will be important for pediatrician, that is what I'm going to talk now. So the next slide, the WHO has come out with a book of Guide to Cancer, Early Diagnosis. This is about adult and pediatrics. Next slide. So that one says very clearly, now in the phone, whether I don't know whether you will be able to appreciate or not, but that 7 o'clock position, there's a term called prevention, and then above that is screening, then comes early diagnosis, then treatment. After treatment, you have two pathways, they will survive or palliative. So the first point in cancer control starts with prevention, then screening, and then early diagnosis. Then only you should start treatment. Next slide. So now the point is, in that booklet, it is very clearly, see, the first booklet from WHO I have read this ARI control program. So that was amazing. That was in 1995. My chief Thomas Cherian told me there's something called ARI. I did not ask him what is ARI. I didn't have Google that time to put it and ask, did you mean this? So I heard something like ARI, then I went to library, they gave me a WHO book. Very, very nicely written. The exact feeling I heard that when I read this book also I heard. If any one of you have read about a booklet released by government, A.K. Rajan, about NEET, it is available in the internet also. If you read that, I don't want to give any biased view, but if you can read that 135 pages about NEET impact in Tamil Nadu in the next 10 years or 20 years about the healthcare system, that guidelines also is beautifully written. So my point is, whatever comes from government as a guideline is very beautiful. It is written by very intellectual people. So each statement made by that team is very, very professional. The next comment will not be very good. I don't know whether you are recording or not, but when it comes to implementation, it won't be as good as the developed country. But whatever, this statement, if you read from WHO about childhood cancer, very beautiful. Screening is generally not helpful for childhood cancer. Finished. But they put an asterisk and say some select cases, like in eye cancers, if anyone is identified in the family with retinoblastoma, the sibling should be monitored. So we can ask ourselves, are we monitoring this or not? If there is a URI child coming in the family, are we asking a history of retinoblastoma in the family or not? That is what the question. I have never asked as a pediatrician. I never thought that was very important to screen. But finally, they are saying genetic causes of childhood cancers are relevant only in a handful of children. So this handful of children does not qualify for a high quality evidence to support population-based screening. But I am talking about pediatrician-based screening. What is the role? That's what we are going to say. So if you see a child with neurofibromatosis, what you should do? Definitely you should screen for optic pathway tumor. That is what the first message. So there are some features like syndrome or some features like some dysmorphism. I am going to say legally you are bound to evaluate or screen for some cancers. So we'll start with neurofibroma. So you have to write known case of neurofibroma, come with diarrhea or URI. Now the child has not been screened for optic glioma once in 3 months or 6 months as per the ophthalmologist. So don't refer to pediatric oncology. Okay, you can refer to ophthalmology. Then next slide. So what they say here is more than the screening and prevention, it is the importance of early diagnosis which is almost equivalent to preventable because of the high cure rates of childhood cancer. The third point of WHO, first is prevention, second is screening, and the third one is early diagnosis. Now, the pediatrician's role in treating or in the outcome of childhood cancer is not in the prevention, but I'll tell you what they can prevent. But screening, definitely in retinoblastoma and some genetic syndromes or with some dysmorphism. But the most important is early diagnosis. Next slide. So this slide is like almost like a philosophical slide. I took this from again the WHO only. This was very much new to me. In any diagnosis, you take pneumonia or diarrhea, whatever, you have 3 delays. Okay. Not 3 diagnoses, 3 delays. One is access delay, second was diagnostic delay, and third one is treatment delay. Very beautiful. Almost like ARI control program, no pneumonia, some pneumonia, or severe pneumonia, very severe pneumonia. So what is access delay? You take it as breast cancer. The population should be aware of some symptoms of cancer. They themselves should come out. So if you put an implication of retinoblastoma here, there should be a population or the crowd or society should know that there is a leukocoria which should be referred to a hospital. The population should know. So that is access delay. If they don't have the idea or if they are not being taught about that idea, there will be an access delay. The second point is diagnostic delay. Now, the next point is very important for our curriculum. If they come with leukocoria, our healthcare system should be able to pick up that as retinoblastoma. That is diagnostic delay. Even if you clinically diagnose, there should be investigations to prove that. The third is the most important role of pediatricians. The second point is for pediatrician, diagnostic. I don't think any childhood cancer patient will reach a pediatric oncologist directly. In the welcome remarks, it was beautifully made. Most of them reach to some other department. Okay, orthopedics with a sports injury, osteosarcoma, brain tumor, vomiting to gastroenterologist. And arthritis as initial presentation goes to rheumatologist, sometimes to pediatrician, but never to pediatric oncologist. So the pediatrician and the adult medical curriculum people should know that this diagnostic delay can be prevented by them. But the next important thing is after that, where do they refer? According to the accessibility, affordability, acceptability, and with the high quality care. That beautiful terms. That's why I read that NEET documentation at least 3 times. Like that, ARI program and the WHO cancer guide. So that's why it's told when the committee is formed, they are doing so much of fantastic thing to make these documents. I think the medical curriculum, or we all should, without wasting time in WhatsApp, should read this kind of documents. So the 3 words: accessible, affordable, acceptable. These are the 3 things which a pediatrician should know before referring the patient. Next slide. So I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, it is like a movie. 2018, 1 year old. 2018 means before COVID. So the era is divided into before COVID and after COVID. So 2018, 1 year old, a farmer's girl child in a village of North India is coming with a whitish abnormality to a primary health center, and they are suspecting nutritional deficiency and giving some drops. And they went to an ophthalmology center, operated for cataract, and developed a progressive swelling, which the family panickingly went to the next hospital. That was a different hospital, and they made a diagnosis of metastatic left eye retinoblastoma. Father is 5th standard and mother is 3rd standard, joint family. Now the prognosis was told to be bad, and they wanted to come, but that time COVID started. Okay, and the child became bedridden. Next slide. So after like 3 months or 6 months of struggling, the community support was available, and then they came to Chennai. Next slide. So that at that time I saw the child. Next slide. So before we go into the next picture, I am warning that pregnant ladies, weak heart children, and heart patients should not see that. Next slide, please. So this is terrible. We are due to this kind of thing. So you can go to the next slide. We don't need to see that. Next slide. Okay. So what we started was a palliative intent chemotherapy, and the child beautifully responded. Okay. 2018 to 2021, this girl child with uneducated parents and poor parents, poverty in a village, in a rural health system. They have gone through this phase of access delay, diagnostic delay, and a referral. Okay, next slide. So the child had a very near normal quality of life for 3 to 4 months, and then the child came back with the CNS leukemia. That's what will happen, and the child succumbed to the disease. Next slide. So father's question before he left from our hospital was, could that have been picked up earlier when they went with the suspicion of a whitish abnormality? I never answered that question. Okay, I don't think we need to answer that time. But I thought I will answer that question to most of the pediatricians whom I have come with contact. From that day onwards, I started this screening message or prevention or whatever. So what went on, problem here is lower literacy, poverty, improper diagnosis, delay in the referral system, non-availability of affordable treatment in the local place. But all these cannot be changed overnight. So only one point we are going to make is the child's diagnosis should have been earlier. So next slide. That is what the message in the IAP made today. I don't believe in this 3 lakhs or 10 lakhs people and talking. Even 3 people or 1 person is enough. 1:1, I'm very comfortable to talk. But I see here it was more than 30, 35 people with the organizing people also. So 1 person in the next 20 years can pick up 1 retinoblastoma is more than enough for the success of this diagnosis. So this child has gone through all the delays, access delay. I don't blame anybody because I have missed so many things during my pediatric career in the first 10 years. I managed a JA patient which turned out to be leukemia. I've missed a hepatoblastoma. I've given wrong dosages, everything. So I'm not blaming anybody. But can we do the same thing what I did in 92 or 93 in this era with all the mobile phones and media waiting and all the, there are so many people with the law degree with 500 rupees certificate floating around as uncle. Can we all can we afford this kind of cases is going to be a question. Next slide. So this child is one example for a no delay. There's one child who came with a 15 centimeter abdominal mass from West Bengal, referred to our hospital for free treatment, completely operated, came as lipoblastomatosis. And without any payment, 14 days later, with the home away home stay free, and the surgery was free, and they went back with a proper diagnosis with only with the follow-up. They came with nil money, went with nil money. So that is something equivalent to a proper treat. I am not saying that this is the only hospital. There are so many hospitals. You select a pediatric oncology hospital after talking to the pediatric oncologist, checking their socioeconomic status, and then looking at the medical, social, financial, accommodation, everything together, and then refer. Starting from either Kidwai or Kuppuswamy Naidu Hospital, or every area has one hospital for a proper referral. But the contact from the pediatrician should be with the pediatric oncologist, social worker, give the phone number, keep the follow-up through the phone. That is defined as the appropriate referral. Next slide. So what is point about early diagnosis is, there are WHO and SIOP, there are given 7 symptoms and signs only, of which I'm going to touch 1 or 2 symptoms and signs. So these are the typical leukemia symptoms: pallor, bruising, bleeding, general bone pain. Okay, so that in that point, arthritis could be an initial presentation of ALL is the first point all the pediatricians should know. I have managed 6 months a child with methotrexate and steroids. That was in 97 or 98. I still remember the name and the family. And then suddenly one day, the JRA patient, that time the term was JRA. I have written in the notes, that was during DCHMD. Many times we have treated like JRA. And suddenly some thrombocytopenia, some bone pain will come. When we do a bone marrow, it becomes leukemia. So arthritis could be an initial presentation of ALL. That is the one of the point which the pediatrician can understand, that as a not a prevention, not a screening, but early diagnosis. Next slide, please. So gingival hypertrophy. So there was a there's a pediatrician from Tirunelveli who was trained in CMC Vellore. He was seeing like 300 patients in the outpatient. 20 dengue was admitted. He called me and said, this dengue patient has got a gingival hypertrophy. Okay, so he referred that as suspected AML. That turned out to be AML. That is what is called screening. Okay, the screening is not like mammography or like a first page advertisement in Hindu paper that this are all the doctors available to screen you, will come and pick you up, drop. That is not the screening. Screening is actually one stigma which reminds you for a diagnosis. The gingival hypertrophy could be an early stigma of the AML. That point which was learned through MD Pediatrics saved this patient. That is screening. Next slide. Okay, so but another point is the delay, access delay or the diagnosis delay. Many times our point is doing FNAC, getting granulomatous for a neck lymph node, and then suspecting tuberculosis. It is not wrong. I'm saying that is not a wrong teaching, but you will miss out Hodgkin's lymphoma. If it was tuberculosis, that evidence is enough. We have submitted an article recently saying that granuloma in the Hodgkin's lymphoma, it turned out to be Hodgkin's lymphoma. It was thought to be tuberculosis, and all the journals rejected. 13 journals rejected. They all said one comment is well known. Why do you want to publish? But I felt bad because we need a publication for each MD pediatric. That is different. Then we paid and put it that in the journal. That is different. But it is well known that no journal will accept that granulomatous presentation of Hodgkin lymphoma is well known, starting from Robbins pathology. In 1989, I should have studied. But mostly like me, many of the medical students would not have studied. At least remember today, if you suspect Hodgkin's lymphoma, you have to do an excisional biopsy. You cannot afford 6 months of ATT. But if your diagnosis is tuberculosis, that is different. But if you suspect malignancy, suspicion is your clinical judgment. But if you suspect malignancy, FNAC is a diagnostic delay. Next slide. Abdominal swelling, how do you screen? Next slide. So if there is a huge abdominal, we'll go ulta. If you see a child for vaccination with hemihypertrophy, with a suspected iron deficiency, thinking that it is platelets are high, don't think of iron deficiency. Hemihypertrophy, thrombocytosis, this next slide is hepatoblastoma, AFP of more than 10 lakhs. Again, that lawyer uncle will ask, could that have been screened? You are putting immunization for 12 months now. Now the hepatoblastoma is lung metastatic. What the question is, even at birth, this child needs screening, which is like hemihypertrophy. Any hemihypertrophy, but then history of prematurity, low birth weight, in vitro fertilization, all that have been described in hepatoblastoma. Okay, low birth weight babies, very high risk. Preterm, high risk. But now the papers are coming, in vitro fertilization has a high risk feature or not? It is not. Actually, it is a scary thing. Our huge business will be stopped. So I don't want to make a statement, but it's not true that in vitro fertilization has a high risk feature for hepatoblastoma. What is connecting is in vitro fertilization, if leads to prematurity with a low birth weight, they have the same increased risk for hepatoblastoma. It is not the IVF babies. Okay. But the studies will keep on changing. So there is a huge cohort from UK, 10 years, normal fertilization and in vitro fertilization. There's no increased risk of malignancy. Although they have found hepatoblastoma more because they are attributing that to prematurity and low birth weight. Next slide. So you should have screened the child with hemihypertrophy for hepatoblastoma without doubt. Now coming to the next point, this is what WHO is saying. If there is a eye changes, refer to a ophthalmology center if there is a white eye reflex. Even if it is cataract is fine. Next slide. But in US, there was a study that retinoblastoma, out of 100 children, 80 were diagnosed by leukocoria only. And majority, at least the second on that is ophthalmologist, and only the third place for a pediatrician to diagnose by screening. Next slide. Screening means what is happening is red eye reflex. This torch has no connection between Coimbatore, South Chennai, 1540 volts. It's not that torch. This torch is for our own pediatrician to screen for red eye reflex. American Academy of Pediatrics legally takes an action if the red eye reflex is not documented in the newborn and also during the every visit of immunization. Next slide, please. So the inherited retinoblastoma need to screen. Okay, there is a genetic testing for retinoblastoma, but it's very difficult to do. 25,000. It's done in only very rare labs. So how do you suspect retinoblastoma as a genetic etiology is for a young child, bilateral, multifocal disease or a positive history like a father and mother or a sibling, then it has to be taken as a heritable disease. If it is first sibling, father or mother, or very young sibling, the next sibling definitely has to be screened. Irrespective of that, red eye reflex screening is definitely mandatory. Next slide, please. Okay, I have got two histories told by a retinoblastoma expert, Dr. Suganeshwari. 20 days old newborn baby, because of prematurity, there is one hospital who is referring for ROP, but term baby also was referred wrongly and they picked up a retinoblastoma and the child was completely cured with normal vision. And the father was from a very, very affluent family who had retinoblastoma, was paranoid about retinoblastoma inherited. So at birth, day 1 onwards, he started screening privately and he found to have a group A, one smallest spot of retinoblastoma, it was removed. And the ophthalmological expert says these are the two patients who are like very rarely has a normal vision with retinoblastoma. Please remember, retinoblastoma, there are two survivors are there. One is ocular survival, second is a life survivor. The life survivor, if they are blind, it is a very, very greatest comorbidity. So if you pick up the retinoblastoma by a red eye reflex, by a pediatrician, refer to ophthalmologist, or pick up the high-risk nature due to the other sibling affected or parent affected, obviously. But it does not qualify for everybody to be screened by ophthalmology. We have to be very practical. So either the community has to be informed about the leukocoria. One, we can tell in Big Boss, if you want 4 crores people will see. 2, the government should teach, or the public should know, or at least red eye reflex, and then the high-risk features. Then next slide. Okay, so what these are all my points. My points is very practical. See, I think that UG and PG pediatrics should know, obviously. Newborn screening should be complete, and there should be a column for family history of retinoblastoma. Is it worth or not? Probably it is like 10,000 retinoblastoma patient per year, and you can save 9,000 eyes. And one might be Abdul Kalam or Kamaraj or whatever. If it is worth, if you think, then we should probably screen. And then early referral to ophthalmologist center where they treat retinoblastoma, not diagnose retinoblastoma. Because after getting involved with retinoblastoma team in Shankar Nehtal, then only I know Aravind Eye Hospital, LV Prasad, or whatever, AIMS, every hospital has a well-developed center. The way they do the photocoagulation, intra-arterial. So the pediatric oncologist input for the retinoblastoma is very, very less. It is 95% is early referral by pediatrician, rest 5% by ophthalmologist, maybe 0% by pediatric oncologist. But pediatric oncologists will give chemotherapy when it is needed, okay, or palliate, whatever. So, but I think the pediatricians should be the main person to pick up and refer retinoblastoma, and they should have a perfect referral pathway for retinoblastoma. Next slide, please. So this is some criticism, with otherwise I will not be able to sleep. That is inborn, inherited from Tirunelveli, I think. So we keep Manto, vitamin A deficiency. That is what the spotter. But I think the UG teaching, we should include leukocoria as a spotter. Unless it becomes an exam case, nobody will remember that. Even if it is exam case, nobody will remember. That is different. But exam case, at least I'm talking, Manto test is, I'm not going to stop tuberculosis teaching. It is a wrong thinking if you go away that I'm promoting retinoblastoma. No, we are promoting retinoblastoma in addition to tuberculosis. We are whatever endemic for tuberculosis, all that infections is very important, malnutrition, that is all not changed from my pediatric thinking. But my thinking is there is something which is highly curable and changes the life and light of the family should be given importance. And I'm not going to give less importance to tuberculosis. So there is a statement in the Times of India that the medicos not taught about cancer or ethics in undergraduate level. She said, can you guess who is that she? Next slide. That is Dr. Shanta from Adyar Cancer Institute. She spoke in our own college that we are not teaching about cancer and ethics to undergraduate level. Next slide. But I think we should start teaching both cancer and ethics. So what I proposed, so Mudal Kayiluthu, if we want to form a government, not form a government, if we want to form some rules for the government, I would definitely suggest this National Retinoblastoma Control Program. But the team should be led by ophthalmologists with retinoblastoma expertise. It will be coordinated by pediatric oncologists, but most important thing is pediatrician. I think IAP's goal should be sustainable developmental goals or something, but should be run by NGOs, government, corporate, CSR funding, and community. We should be involving awareness to pick up access delay, reduce access delay by the community, then the diagnostic delay, then the referral delay. The daily diagnosis and appropriate referral, it is in the hand of pediatrician. Next slide. So we'll be finishing in 2 more minutes. The most important prevention in childhood is adult cancer, not childhood cancer. What is the role of pediatrician? If you pick up metabolic syndrome, obesity, reduce the obesity, ask the people to get out of the screen time and go with some good exercise, eat fruits and vegetables, not junk food, and maybe supplement with vitamin D, but that is not obviously proven like these 3 things: weight reduction, exercise, fruits and vegetables. Okay, and sleep hygiene, screen time, vitamin D, all that pediatricians will be thorough. But this has been promoted by WHO that 1/3 of adult cancer could be prevented by early education in the pediatric age group. So you have a role of that. Next slide, please. And obviously hepatitis B and HPV vaccination. HPV vaccination, I'm not a branded ambassador, but I am sure that the companies will be very happy. But I think even WHO agrees that I have disclaimer is I don't know even the brand name or anything about HPV vaccination, but HPV vaccination is such a bad awareness among even medical students. For the first year, I asked them at 18 years, how many of you have got a HPV vaccination? Very sad thing. There was still very highly affluent families who are not taken HPV vaccination. Okay, next slide. So what is the summary is, you can't prevent childhood cancer, obviously, but you can prevent adult cancer as a pediatrician by some lifestyle modification in childhood cancer. Screening, obviously you can do little with the torch. Next time, please don't miss the opportunity of the torch. And last one, the most important, 99% is early diagnosis and appropriate referral. I don't say referral, it is appropriate referral. Doesn't mean that you have to refer to me only. It is appropriately should be referred. It is equivalent to prevention and screening. And I want to end with this statement. I think the most important point in my life happened in Coimbatore. Can you ever believe that? That was in 1991. I was actually 21 years old, studying as a pre-final medical student. And there was a program in CMC. That time CMC means I never heard that was a hospital in CMC Vellore. CMC, Coimbatore Medical College. That is what given as a letter to Dean. And there was a Silver Jubilee program in 1991. And they conducted a intercollegiate fine arts festival. So 60 of us came from Tirunelveli, and almost 18 or 20 programs I participated, including dance, skit, everything. And then we were in tie with Madras Medical College for 5 marks. That was the last program, was on the stage as a cine quiz. That is where it saved. So I came with one of the participants and sat on the stage, and cinema quiz, 99.9% I only answered. So we got 10 marks and we got the medal, and it was one day holiday for Tirunelveli Medical College. That was the first time we won the overall shield. After that, next 2 years, the college believed me as a cultural secretary, and we took 11 shields, overall shield. So that was the 2 reasons. One is Ajita called me. Second thing is the relationship with Coimbatore. Although there was a failure. I'm not talking about medicine. Okay, now that is the message, but the message should not end with like the cinema message. Smoking causes cancer. Or drinking is dash, dash, dash. All of them will talk, and then nobody will follow that. And even interval, all of them will be smoking. So we will probably participate in picking up retinoblastoma. And we from Tamil Nadu should say that 99.9% or 100% of retinoblastoma was screened by pediatrician and found out as group A or referred appropriately, and ocular survival is 90%. That's what we should say. And I really thank Ajita for calling me. It is always very good to sit with your student because in Mahabharata, teacher and student will fight only, but the current era should not be. We will continue to mentor until they retire or we retire. So that is one opportunity. I'm one of my best students is Dr. Ajita, that I can state that. And she is doing already wonderful budding, not budding on colleges. She is already a big flower, I think. Thank you for the opportunity. I think I'm in time. We can go to the next program. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for that very lively and excellent presentation. We don't have any questions in the chat box, although there is one comment by Dr. Jalil, sir. Reflex documentation in the neonatal discharge summary is mandatory.
Yes,
Jalil,
very
sir?
good. Good point.
Sir, Fauzia, can I have 1 minute, Fauzia?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure, sir.
Sir, one of the very humane, perfect deliberation of this pediatric cancer, sir. You are very, very nice points you have taken out. Like for retinoblastoma screening, we should also have a neuroblastoma screening in the early neonatal, because the confirmation and diagnosis of neuroblastoma will have an excellent outcome when you diagnose early, especially in the in utero and in the immediate neonatal period. Is there any possibility for that, like a screening reflex for retinoblastoma? Is there anything available for neuroblastoma, sir?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Actually, even yesterday I had a 7 days old newborn baby as a perinatal neuroblastoma. Okay, and there is a Japan study. I don't know the correct year, maybe 10 years before, they started mass screening for neuroblastoma. But finally, Children's Oncology Group found out that if you screen and find out neuroblastoma in the newborn age group, even if you treat or don't treat, the outcome is not different because 90% of them will disappear spontaneously. So doing VMA or the screening is not very significant enough like retinoblastoma, they concluded. So we are now picking up only in the antenatal scan. If there is a neuroblastoma or adrenal mass, we will wait and watch or operate depending upon some criteria. So the screening is a very good point, but it is not practically, it's very important. The outcome is not going to change.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we will go move on from the teacher to the student to Dr. Ajita. She will be talking on wolves in sheep clothing, a few pediatric hematology case scenarios. Dr. Ajita completed her MBBS from Madras Medical College and her MD Pediatrics from ICH Chennai. And she has done a fellowship in pediatric hematology and oncology at Kanchi Kamakodi Child Trust Hospital, Chennai. She has a fellowship in pediatric bone marrow transplant. And at present, she's a consultant pediatric hemato-oncologist at GKNM Hospital, Coimbatore. Her areas of interest are pediatric solid tumors, brain tumors, and HLH. Over to you, Dr. Ajita.
Thank you, ma'am. So thank you, sir, for your kind words, and I thank everyone for providing me the opportunity. And I think sir's presentation was excellent. Everyone would agree on that. But a few points missed where probably everyone was wondering the references to Torch and Bigg Boss. Sir is a huge Kamal Haasan fan. So that is where the Torch comes in. And sir's interest probably in retinoblastoma too. So September, as ma'am said, is Childhood and Cancer Awareness Month. And probably I look at a few case scenarios where the child was apparently diagnosed with a seemingly benign condition and turned out to be malignancy. This is again not to malign anyone. This is just to know how we are often duped by cancer. So case one is a 6-year-old female child who had fever for 5 days with occasional body aches. On examination, she was well except for some mild bone tenderness and firm moderate splenomegaly. These are her counts. There was mild leukocytosis with mild thrombocytopenia and anemia. And she was seen by a pediatrician, and rightly all the infective workup was done, which turned out to be negative. The smear, the child was originally from Erode. There, a pathologist had reported as neutrophilic leukocytosis, but the pediatrician seemed that something is amiss as nothing was turned up in the infective workup, and he had referred to us, and the smear review showed us this thing. So obviously we can see there are huge cells in the high power. These are very much larger than the red cells. These are lymphoblasts. And it was 80% blast with a neutrophil count of only 10%. So what was reported as neutrophilic leukocytosis was actually an acute leukemia. And of course, uric acid and LDH were elevated, which would give a clue towards the diagnosis of leukemia. So take-home message is that, as sir rightly pointed out, bone pains in any child is always pathological. Bone tenderness should be elicited. There should be attention paid to the neutrophil count. Often we miss the absolute neutrophil count, and we do need to have a good pathologist to back us up, and uric acid and LDH would be good tests to at least know if it is elevated, we can say that we are dealing with something malignant. Case 2, we have an 8-year-old male child who had leg pain at night for 1 week, and it gets better with massage. He has recently started to limp, and on first hospital visit, he had a right ankle swelling. There was mild anemia, leukopenia with a platelet count of 1.2 lakhs. There was elevated ESR and CRP. Rest of the investigations were normal. The child was initially suspected to have JAA and the child was started on pulse steroids. Initially, he responded, but he persisted to have pain later on. And this is the X-ray of the child. So later on, he had an X-ray which revealed a osteolytic lesion. The MRI also revealed there is some osteolytic lesion there. So the child was provisionally diagnosed to have an osteomyelitis, probably a pyogenic or a tuberculous osteomyelitis. The cultures were sent from guided biopsy and histopathology was also sent. Initially, he was started on IV antibiotics. He was not responding and he was started on empirical ATT. So final histopathology report revealed it to be a lymphoma, and in retrospect, the smear revealed a blast. So when we have a predominant lymphocytosis in a child with in the differential count, we need to think whether these are blasts which we are dealing with and not the normal lymphocytes or even an atypical lymphocyte. So predominant atypical lymphocytosis, which is reported outside, can turn out to be a malignancy. So one other hematological disorder which can present or present with osteomyelitis and anemia would be sickle cell anemia. So in any child who has non-specific bone pains on and off and suddenly one day lands up with osteomyelitis, we need to review the smear and you can see that there are beautiful sickling. So this is a sickle cell anemia. So bone pains in children are always pathological apart from the diagnosis of infections and autoimmune disorders made by a pediatrician. Other disorders would be acute leukemias, bone tumors, Langerhans cell histiocytosis. Usually a bone involvement can present like a unifocal or multifocal osteomyelitis. And then you can have hematological disorder like sickle cell presenting with osteomyelitis. And like Scott sir said, we often have a child with long-standing arthritis diagnosed as JA, finally turning out to be leukemia because the malignancy also responds to steroids and methotrexate. So any child who has excruciating pain, awakening sleep, pain away from joints, any atypical lymphocytosis, thrombocytopenia or elevated uric acid should point towards malignancy rather than JA. And there is a report by American Society of Pediatric Hemato-Oncology that strongest factors predictive of ALL would be leukopenia and thrombocytopenia and nighttime pains. Rashes or ANA do not help to differentiate leukemia and JA. So we have cases 3 and 4. They have a link. So the first case would be a 4-year-old female child who had a fever for 3 days, which settled. And then the mother noticed that the child was not moving both the limbs. And probably the child was brought to a pediatrician and they had a diagnosis of Guillain-Barré syndrome. And then the child was referred to neurology. And the child was actually seen in the neurology department of medical college. And the child was noticed to have flaccid paralysis of both the limbs. So provisional diagnosis of GBS was made and the child was started on IVIG. The child was also given steroids. I was not sure on that point why steroids were started. So the child started responding and she started to walk and the parents were happy. The second scenario is a 6.5 years old male child who had fever on and off for 1 month, noticed to have rashes and cervical lymphadenopathy. The child, this was recent, so COVID IgG was done, which was positive, and the child was assumed to have a MISC and the child was started on steroids. So both the children had recurrence of symptoms and they landed up finally here when they developed cytopenias, and both the children turned out to be leukemia. So the take home point is that any child with even a mild thrombocytopenia should alert towards a looming suspicion of malignancy. And in ITP, we usually have a suspicion because there is severe thrombocytopenia because it always alarms. But then ITP is benign. And usually we do a bone marrow aspiration, though it is not recommended by any of the societies when the clinical suspicion is very strong of ITP. But the word clinical is the key, and we need to have a good pathologist review the smear. So steroids should never be given when there are cytopenias without confirming the diagnosis. Even if blood transfusion is indicated before referral, generally pre-medication with steroids for any blood transfusion is not recommended. And bone marrow preferably should be done in tertiary centers, because if a child has a pancytopenia without organomegaly, the diagnosis could also be aplastic anemia, wherein we need a biopsy too. And in both the cases of aplastic anemia and leukemia, bone marrow karyotyping is very, very important, and it needs to be processed within 24 hours. So whenever a bone marrow is indicated, it is better done in a tertiary care center. So moving on to the next case, we have a 1-year-old female infant who has a history of failure to thrive since infancy, motor developmental delay, fever on and off for 1 month, bilateral discharging ears for 1 month. It is a serosanguinous discharge, bilateral progressive neck swellings, and rashes over the scalp and the back of trunk, and also abdominal distension. All these symptoms were for 1 month. So the infant was seen by a pediatrician, referred to an ENT surgeon, then a dermatologist. The ENT surgeon had seen an isolation for the ASOM, and he had prescribed oral antibiotics. The dermatologist had seen it as a seborrhea, and she had managed for seborrhea. There was no improvement in symptoms, and finally the child was referred to a tertiary care center. So when the child was brought, he was sick looking, he was undernourished, febrile. There was seborrhea, there was bilateral otorrhea, and there were bilateral cervical lymphadenopathy. And the child also had mild stridor with respiratory distress. Per abdomen examination revealed hepatosplenomegaly. So these are the labs. We can see that there is pancytopenia, and retroviral screening was negative. The LDH was elevated, uric acid was normal, CRP was elevated. And this is the chest X-ray, which you can obviously see there is a mediastinal widening. So when we saw the child, we had asked for a skeletal survey, and it showed a osteolytic lesion in the middle of the frontal bone. So this is the typical case of a Langerhans cell histiocytosis. So it is like different people examining the elephant at different points and saying different things. So LCH is a great mimicker. So any child with LCH will land up with different people, different departments. So they'll go to orthopedician for osteomyelitis. They will land up with ENT surgeons for CSOM, and they land up with dermatologists for seborrhea. And rarely they can have gastrointestinal manifestations, landing up with diarrhea. And an endocrinologist can see because of the diabetes insipidus, because of CNS involvement. So another close differential diagnosis in any child who presents with eczema and thrombocytopenia with failure to thrive, with or without recurrent infections, would be Wiskott-Aldrich syndrome. So this is a close differential diagnosis. So biopsy is by diagnosis is by biopsy of the least involved site, which would be skin if it were involved, or any other involved site. And so the diagnosis is with CD1A positivity, and other investigations depend on the presentation. And if there is suspicion of high risk CNS involvement or diabetes insipidus, we also need a MRI of the head. So take home message from case 5 is that discharging ears with any of the below presentations should raise a suspicion of LCH. So failure to thrive, seborrhea, abnormal labs, pancytopenia, polyuria indicative of diabetes insipidus, lytic bone lesions, and when the child is not responding to antibiotics. So since we saw a child with mediastinal mass, moving on to the next child, we had a 12-year-old boy who presented with fever for 2 weeks on and off, and respiratory distress. So when the child was brought, initial labs were done and X-ray was done, which revealed this picture. So we can see that there is some sort of mediastinal widening here, but there is also a obvious pericardial pleural effusion in the left side. So when there is a presentation like this, we will think of either a tuberculous pleural effusion, or if there is an underlying pneumonia, probably a pneumonic effusion. So pleural tap was done and sent for the microbiological investigations. But the cytology revealed it to be atypical cells. And after taking the fluid for flow cytometry, we confirmed it to be T lymphoblastic lymphoma. So whenever we have a suspicion of malignancy, or even otherwise, when there is an atypical presentation or a recurrent pleural effusion, it is necessary to do cytology and to preserve large volume of samples for running flow cytometry test. And flow cytometry can be done in any sample which can flow. So flow cytometry is the gold standard for diagnosing acute leukemias. So this is just an approach to any child with mediastinal mass. So we always go from the least invasive to the most invasive technique. So the least invasive to do a complete blood counts and a peripheral smear. And if there is suspicion of leukemia, we can do a peripheral blood flow cytometry. We need not even go towards a bone marrow test. So diagnosis of leukemia and confirmation can be done from peripheral blood itself. And any child with mediastinal mass also needs to have a tumor markers for germ cell tumor like beta HCG and AFP done. And if the initial blood screen is non-diagnostic, then we can attempt an bone marrow if there is definite cytopenia. So if the child does not have a bone marrow involvement, it can be a T lymphoblastic lymphoma without bone marrow involvement, then this might not be helpful. So if that is the case, then we can do a pleural or a pericardial tapping and run the flow cytometry, which will be helpful. Or if it is not possible, we can do any peripheral palpable lymph node biopsy. And finally, if the above cases do not help, then only we will go for a mediastinal biopsy. If the child has impending respiratory failure, it is better to start with therapy even before diagnosis, but this is only a last resort. So coming to cases 6 and 7, this is a 12-year-old girl presented with right iliac fossa pain, vomiting, and she had McBurney tenderness. Ultrasound revealed it to be acute appendicitis. The child was taken up for urgent laparotomy, and there was an intussusception of the terminal ileum with a mesenteric mass. And next we have a 8-year-old male who had presented with features of throat pain and difficulty in swallowing. And on examination, there was bilateral tonsillar hypertrophy with right tonsils larger than the left tonsils. So what could be the common link between the both? So it is the first DD, in first case, the DD would be appendicular mass or tuberculosis. The second case would be acute tonsillitis. But when the ENT physician saw the second child, he had a suspicion of malignancy because it was extending beyond the tonsillar fossa posteriorly. So he just took a biopsy instead of proceeding with the tonsillectomy. And the biopsy turned out to be Burkitt lymphoma. So the first child had an elevated uric acid, creatinine, and potassium when the child was referred to a pediatric oncologist. So the child landed up with tumor lysis syndrome, and he required aggressive management for tumor lysis, RAS buricase, and the child even required dialysis. So take-home message is that Burkitt lymphoma is a very aggressive tumor, and most commonly it presents as an abdominal mass, though rarely it can present with a small polyp which can lead to intussusception. So intussusception in an older child should alert the possibility of any lead point, and mass can be identified in an imaging, and any unilateral tonsillar hypertrophy or altered coloration of the palatine tonsil should alert towards lymphomas. This is very important because the child may be having a spontaneous tumor lysis even before treating malignancy, and supportive care like hydration or allopurinol can be initiated before referral. So there are only 2 more cases. So case 8 is a 11-year-old female who developed abdomen pain and pain in right thigh for 3 months. The child was also limping. There were no constitutional symptoms. The child had a contact with the known case of tuberculosis. So on examination, she was otherwise well, except that she had a minimal swelling in the right inguinal region, and she had her hip in flexed and internally rotated posture. The labs were normal. Initial blood counts were normal. Imaging revealed probable psoas abscess. Retroviral serology was negative. Culture and biopsy was done from the right inguinal swelling. So the initial probable diagnosis was an abscess or a psoas cold abscess which had trickled down. But the final diagnosis turned out to be an anaplastic large cell lymphoma. We can see large pleomorphic cells here. So it is a rare T-cell lymphoma. Like tuberculosis, it is a great mimicker. There is constitutional symptoms. There can be cutaneous nodules, which is very classical of anaplastic large cell lymphoma. There can be papillonodular lesions, and there can be abscesses similar to tubercular cold abscess. HLH can also be the only presentation of an anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So next will be case 9. This is a 2-year-old child with female child with chronic malnutrition and a left orbital swelling and fever, which was progressive. On examination, the child was undernourished and she had a left orbital swelling, hepatosplenomegaly. And she received IV antibiotics for suspicion of preseptal cellulitis. The counts were normal, blood cultures were sterile. MRI of the orbit revealed a preseptal abscess with cellulitis. So this is the imaging. You can see that there is a preseptal cellulitis. The child was continued on antibiotics. There was no response. Hence, exploration and pus aspiration was planned, but there was a dry tap. So biopsy was taken from the site. The biopsy of the lesion was inconclusive. A repeat biopsy was done, and finally it turned out to be a diffuse large B-cell lymphoma. This is a very rare lymphoma. The point is that it is the commonest lymphoma in any child with primary immunodeficiency. So malignancies in a child with known primary immunodeficiency can mimic infections, thereby delaying the diagnosis. This is because fever can be a common point. Fungal nodules are similar to lymphoma nodules. Similarly, the child can be suspected to have tuberculosis when there is a lymphadenopathy. GA infections can mimic maltomas, which are common in this child. And similar to this child, we can have abscesses which are actually malignancies, though this is a rare scenario. So coming to these two questions, these are actually just for a rare phenomenon. The first is a child with ALL survivor who is on follow-up with a pediatrician for common complaints. She lands up suddenly with difficulty in the vision in the left eye with features of conjunctivitis, and on examination there is a hypopaeon here. Question number 2, this is a 40-year-old female who has delivered a baby who has some facial dysmorphism, and there is neutrophilic leukocytosis which was reported initially in the smear. So the baby was thought to have sepsis, but then smear revealed something else. So obviously we can see that there are a lot of abnormal cells here. So the diagnosis is in these two cases. So the first case is actually an ALL presenting as a relapse in the eye. So these are actually tumor cells which present like hypopaeon. This is one of the rare presentations of an acute leukemia relapse. And in the second case, this is a child, this is a baby with Down syndrome who is presenting with transient abnormal myelopoiesis. This is a rare phenomenon when leukemia or a leukemia-like phenomenon which can go for spontaneous resolution without treatment and with only just observation. So 80% of these babies need just observation, whereas rarely 20% can land up with acute myeloid leukemia later. So very few malignancies can have spontaneous regression in children and merit only observation. This is one of these situations. So though all these conditions are wolves in sheep clothing, these are wolves which can be tamed and which can be cured. So cure is possible. And this is the theme of International Childhood Cancer Day 2021. Better survival is achievable through our hands and through cumulative effort of everyone involved. And I thank all my alma mater, mentors and patients. And I thank IIP Coimbatore for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ajita, for all this very interesting case scenarios. There is one question here in the chat box. What is RAS buricase?
So RAS buricase is a recombinant uric acid oxidase. It oxidizes uric acid to allantoin, thereby making it easily excretable via the kidney. So we can prevent uric acid mediated acute kidney injury in tumor lysis. This is not available in all centers. It is available only in specialized centers.
There is another question. Is fluoroscopic exposure during cardiac procedure safe in neonates?
Ma'am, I have no idea to this question. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Fauzia, can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
This is to Dr. Ajita, wonderful presentation. You have mentioned about the preseptal cellulitis. Preseptal, that you warrant some biopsy. Hardly we come across this preseptal cellulitis and we treat it with the antibiotic. It is most of the time it is settled down.
Yes.
How long we can wait, or because the approach for the biopsy itself, it is very difficult. Who will do the biopsy, and is a neurosurgeon or the ophthalmic surgeon, and when it is indicated, the biopsy?
So this baby was actually during my fellowship days. So Dr. Scott was also involved. So this was a baby who had a pre-existing infections on and off too. There was a sibling death, and the child was suspected to have a primary immunodeficiency, which was not proven with the initial baseline test. And the child had almost a prolonged course, like 4 weeks of antibiotics, and there was a rapid progression of the cellulitis despite maximum antibiotic cover. So the initial trial was for a tapping to get a microbiological evidence of the infection, whether it was a fungal or a microbial or a bacterial infection. The child was actually referred to an ophthalmology center where they tried to attempt under anesthesia a tapping, but it was a dry tap actually. So that is where they took a small tissue from the biopsy, and then it turned out to be malignancy. We didn't suspect malignancy upfront. It was incidentally detected. So the child had progression of cellulitis on antibiotics.
There is one more questions regarding the lymphoma. The children with the lymphoma, which is going in for impending respiratory failure, we used to thought in earlier days, the lymphoma melt with radiotherapy. It was taught by us also. Is that situation without diagnosis still follow that? For a symptomatic child, with the child with impending respiratory failure, finding difficult to lie down in the cot or everything, that situation, can you recommend this? Still follows that?
Definitely no for radiation. I think I'll give my chance to Dr. Scott, who will say his experiences with mediastinal mass.
Yeah, nowadays, sir, we don't practice that radiation at all. So there is a multidisciplinary team should be involved to make a decision on starting steroids prior to diagnosis, explaining the family about losing the diagnosis, but we should clearly tell them that the life is more important than diagnosis. But that documentation should be involving intensivists, anesthetists, radiologists, and a pediatrician with the oncologist that this child is unfit for a procedure and we will go ahead with steroids. Then 48 hours later, we should take for biopsy. And there are studies proven that 90% we still get a diagnosis. It will not completely disappear. But it is a very tricky position for a child in ICU, cannot lie down with a mediastinal mass. Definitely not for radiation, but definitely not for procedure straight away. So it should be a combined decision discussion whether it should be treated with pre-steroids and then take for biopsy 48 hours later. But sir, 99% we somehow get some diagnosis, whether pleural tap or something like a bone marrow without sedation, take a supraclavicular node. So if you search for a peripheral marker, we probably will be able to make a diagnosis. And it should be all done in a tertiary care center, explaining death as a risk factor while evaluating this patient who is unable to lie down with the mediastinal mass in the intensive care where there is an oncology center exists. Because we cannot refer anytime on a Saturday night or after 24 hours of steroids. So the evaluation should start in a center where you can do everything.
The two messages from these two legendary speakers, one is the red reflex by you sir. Another one from Ajita, no steroid for any cytopenias. This is the two messages we should give to the practicing pediatrician, sir. Excellent presentation, both. Thank you, Fauzia. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, Scott, sir, I think this question is for you. Regarding in view of preventing cancer, fluoroscopic X-ray exposure in cardiac procedure, how safe is it?
As Ajita said, we are not experienced. I know radiation exposure definitely is a risk factor, but I think this point is not practically we are not following up. But I think any other pediatrician have any expertise on that can comment. Is
Thank you,
anybody
sir.
practicing,
So,
any pediatrician practicing that?
there is, no responses. Okay. Can we end the session, sir?
Yeah, thank you for the
Lalit sir,
opportunity.
any
Yeah.
point you would like to? On behalf of IIT Coimbatore and G. Kuppusamy Naidu Memorial Hospital, I thank both the speakers for their excellent deliberation, and I thank all the participants for staying till the end. Thank you all. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Sir.
Bye, sir.
See you, Ajita.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.